Hello and welcome back to Coast FC, the Canadian soccer podcast focused on all things CPL, Canadian Championship, and more. My name is Felipe Ojo,
And I'm Mike Rice.
and today we're doing our second episode in our season preview series, where this time we're going to be focusing on two new teams. We're going to be focusing on Cavalry and Valour FC. So we're going to go into a little bit of their recruitment so far, some of their strengths, some of their weaknesses, some questions that we have around how their seasons might look in the coming months as the season is getting closer and closer every day. And yeah, we're gonna just have some nice chats about these two teams, especially Valor. I know you're excited for that conversation, Mike. Everything that's going on over there. But before we jump into it too much, remember to follow us on all our socials at Coast to Coast FC, as well as finding us now on YouTube so you can see the lovely slides and visuals that we have prepped for you this episode. And consider giving Canada Soccer Daily a follow, because if you didn't hear from last week's episode or announcement on our social media, we are now partnering with Canada Soccer Daily, and we're going to have clips from the show on their website hopefully soon. And so if you don't have time for the full episode, you can go over to their website, see some of the clips that we have for you, noting some of the important points we have throughout the episode. And you can stick around for some of the other articles and content that they have on the website as well. But without further ado, let's start with the first team. And we have to start with the team that is sort of yours, the team that I know that you love to chat about, and that is Valour FC. So obviously, here's some of the points we're going to go through. Huge squad overhaul, a lot of new faces, but a lot of faces that we actually recognize from CPL, either from last season or for seasons prior. Obviously, a lot of new players, but it's the same Phil Dos Santos that we've seen with Valour for the last couple of seasons. So is it really going to change all that much? And what will it take in the end to make it to the playoffs for this team? And what will happen if they don't for a sixth consecutive season? So a lot to chat about. Let's start with some of the incomings first. Obviously, we'll have a huge conversation about the outgoings, because that's another huge point. But starting with the incomings, Mike, I mean, we've been talking about it for quite some time, because the Valour started their business so early on in the off season that we've had multiple episodes talking about the multiple names that are being going in through the revolving doors that is Valour FC right now. But looking at some of the big ones, obviously Sean Hundle is probably the star player that we are seeing in terms of the big number 9. We saw the return of Zachary Secunda, who we saw in the first season of the CPL. He went away and then now has come back to the league. And I put Tasmore Kudus because I see him having a starring role in that defense. For you, looking at not just these, but any of the many acquisitions that they've had, what do you see as like some of the pieces that might be underrated, and how Phil might be building the squad?
Yeah, I think I can agree. Mordekudis, we were all quite surprised York were happy to move on from. Interested what to see. I mean, they've done a little bit of shopping in Finland. Quite interested to see how Chansopoulos does coming in, another big centre back alongside Mordekudis. Not sure who they're going to roll with to start with, but they've got some big old boys in the centre of defence to protect a new goalie again from Finland in Viscosi. So it'll be interesting to see how they get on, especially.
Yeah. And I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how everyone gets on, because they're going to have not much time at home to play or to gel. A lot of the team talks, the match reviews and match prep is going to happen on 747s and in airports, because of their huge away beginning. That's going to impact a lot of the way that the teams actually comes together, because we've seen that when a team has a slow start, it's a real struggle for them to be able to recover in the latter parts of the season. And Valour have probably, the most chips against them because of their situation with their home field.
Yeah.
Do you see, them being able to have all of these new faces gel, given the circumstances, enough for them to start performing right away?
It's going to be really tough, isn't it? Like, say everything's against them to start with. A whole like finishing outside the playoffs, bottom of the table again, to then have to reinvent themselves, lose a lot of the popular faces amongst the dressing room, amongst the fan base, and then to not have a somewhere to call home for so long. They're gonna have to spend a lot of money on the extra leg room for these players, because I mean the crazy amount of sort of bizarre injuries soccer players have had over the years, being stuck and getting sort of leg cramps and dead legs from being stuck stuck in airplanes for so much of the first few months will probably be it's just very Valour.
Yeah, that's what I think as well. As you look at the situation and you think this could only happen to Valor,
Yeah.
everything that with the stadium and the huge away beginnings. But another huge part of why people are questioning how Valor will do in this upcoming season is not just because a lot of players have come in; it's because a lot of players have gone out. A lot of you could say solid starters, and then a few stars. Obviously, the ones pictured there, the biggest ones being Diego Gutierrez, Mateo de Brian, and Ryan Yesley. And you see the huge amount of players that are leaving. Like I think it was like 14 or something players that have left the club. A lot of them, their options were declined. A lot of them, their contracts weren't extended; they expired, and a few of them just left to other. I mean, the three big ones left to direct rivals. So for the way that Valor, this direction that they're moving in, do you see that as sort of like, they're leaving their past behind, the good and the bad, so they can start with a clean new slate? Or was a lot of this sort of out of their control?
I think the big stars that we see in those images were out of their control. Um, I think they've definitely made decisions on. We finished bottom of the table last year. We struggled going forward. These players haven't earned the need to bring them back, and we're going to roll the dice and try with someone else. So a lot of these players, it would have been a decision. Siaj, Selemani, Walter Ponce, Jared Ajoa, Anthony Novak weren't doing the business last year, and they've in Phil De Santos's mind, and he's just decided, they're not going to do it this year. So they've moved on. I'm surprised at quite how many. Maybe that tells us more about what was going on behind the scenes and amongst the squad morale wise. I don't know, but just purely speculation. But it is like we've said before, isn't it? It's Phil De Santos. He's got one last chance with this team, hasn't he? And he's having to make big decisions to try and improve things.
Yeah. And actually, I just double checked. It's 16 players left, not even
16,
14. 16 players left the club. And while, a lot of them, you could say, like you mentioned, they weren't performing. So it sort of makes sense to have that sheer number of players leave is a huge risk. It's a huge gamble. And you have to think that that was purposeful to let that many players go because they're thinking, okay, we got to start fresh. And we know Dos Santos is staying. He got a contract extension despite what happened last season. So I think it's him kind of going in this new direction away from everything that he's had the last couple of seasons. Now you see the fact that they have these huge, gaps that have been left behind by players like Mateo de Brian, like Diego Gutierrez, and like Ryan Yese. Do you think that they'll be able to cope without those star players just because it's no longer even the same team anymore?
Yeah, I think it's no longer sort of comparable. You can't it's not like they're just missing out on their star players. It's a different team with the same name. There's very few coming back. They've kept hold of a lot of their midfield, other than obviously Gutierrez. But otherwise, this is a new attack, really. New goalkeeper, new defense. It's brand new. So it's not. I think it's going to be less. Did these players replace these key players? Is this new squad better than last year's squad?
Yeah, yeah, and it's not just like you said. a new team with the same name. It's also a new team with the same coach. Like we mentioned, Phil Dos Santos is still the same coach. So it's not the same. Like you can't really compare it to like a Halifax Wonders of last season because that was a
No.
new coach with huge overturn. This is a huge overturn, but with the same coach. So it begs the question, I think, of you look at Phil Dos Santos and you look at the fact that he clearly wanted this change, or maybe not to this degree. Maybe he wanted to keep some of the other players. Circumstances might have dictated otherwise, but he wanted to start fresh. You look at the way that now Phil Dos Santos has this new team, has this unfortunate situation that he can't control about the stadium. Do you think that Phil Dos Santos will surprise us this season in terms of the way that he wants to play? We know last season the way that he wanted to play was very like he loved that 4-3-3. He loved the secure midfield. The biggest issue was that they were lacking in the attack. There wasn't really that spark in that team all that much. Do you think he's going to try things differently this season with this completely new squad in terms of maybe a new strategy and trying to maybe highlight some other players? Or is he going to try to do the same game plan, but just now with new shiny pieces?
Yeah, it's good. That's on one hand, I think he's brought in these new players to try and do something a little bit different. To sort of, he looked at the players he had last year and decided they couldn't do anything other than what he was sending them out to do. He couldn't change things up. He didn't feel like those players could do something different to get results. Possibly these ones do, but because, like we just said, they're going on the road so much, their training is going to be impacted by this. Part of me thinks he's going to roll with how he did last year. He's going to look at those players and think, right, well, this is the system. Some of you already know it. Some of you will come in. It's something that he's been coaching. It's not brand new for the whole lot. It's not brand new for him and his coaching staff. And while they're on the road and traveling so much, I'm kind of thinking it's going to be a little bit similar setup, with some minor tweaks possibly going into those opening games, and then as the season goes on, maybe we'll see differences. I'm not sure, but that's what I'm kind of thinking. But maybe the fact that he did so much business so quickly, does that suggest to you maybe they've been training early and they've been getting themselves ready for something new? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it must. I can only hope so because I guess they had a little bit of foresight to say we're probably going to lose a lot of players, so let's not leave everything for the last minute. Let's start, everything early. I mean, they started well before anybody else was
Yeah.
even probably ready to. Probably they were still dealing with, contracts of other players and extending options and stuff like that. And Valour were like, nope, we're already looking into the market. And there's obviously advantages of that where you are getting, you have the pick of the lot of all of the free agents. But it also means that you have to have a game plan already so early because you need the players to buy into what you're creating. And for Phil Dos Santos, I can only assume that he's sort of, I mean, he must be adapting a little bit because
Yeah.
last season didn't work. And I don't think it was just because of the personnel. I think it was also a mix of both the coach and the players. He must be adapting at least a little bit to be able to have a more dynamic team, a more attacking team, a more exciting team with these new players. And I know that when we talked to him, he was focusing on local talent again, or a CPL talent. And you look at the players that they brought in, and you can see that that's true. I mean, Sean Hondal was with Vancouver last season, Alarcon with Cavalry, you have Tasman Dakotas who was in York, even Zachary Secunda. He was originally with Halifax, so he knows the league. It's changed a lot since the first season, but he's still at least a little bit more accustomed than, other players. You look at the players that they brought in last season, and they were from all over the world. And I'm sure some of them didn't even know that Canada had a league until they were contacted by the team. So I think in the approach of having a lot more local players is going to only help them into, be able to assimilate all these players into the team identity, into the team structure. But I am worried a little bit that Dos Santos is still going to try, like he still thinks what he did before worked, and he's going to try to put these players in the system rather than form the system with the new players. It's
Mm.
not like I don't think that you can just take these players' names out like a puzzle piece and put new puzzle pieces in,
Yeah.
thinking that it's going to create the same picture. You need to adapt it. You need to change it somehow. And I know that he's a pure student of the game. He takes his coaching and his tactics very seriously. I
Mm.
think that he's going to. I mean, I'm hoping that he adapts a
Yeah.
little bit. I don't think he's gonna. We're gonna see him go. Like 3-4-2-1 or something completely different to what he's doing. I think we'll probably still see 4-3-3, but hopefully we can see some adaptations in how they play, in possession,
Mm.
because they're probably their biggest thing, and how they look with this new defense, because it's not the same defense that we saw before.
Mm.
And with the team that we saw from Valour is that they build around how solid their defense and their midfield is,
Yeah.
and then they try to attack. And the strength that they had was in their midfield, and luckily, except for Diego Gutierrez, they still have a lot of those players from that solid midfield there, plus a couple of additions.
Mm.
So I think that it will really depend on how, you have to get this in players' minds now, because
Mm.
you're not going to have the time to get them in, to really get into players' minds once the season starts, because you're going to be constantly traveling. It's going to be a whole mess. It's going to be, just it's not going to be an environment where players are going to be able to sit
Yeah.
down and be like, yes, I understand. It's going to be hectic all around, and they're going to have to ride that storm that is the beginning of the season. And the only way I can really see it being successful is if they already go into the season being like, we already have our game plan, we already know how we're going to play, and we are ready.
Mm.
That I think is going to be the biggest thing for Valor.
Definitely. And I mean, this is the problem with Valor. This is the hardest one for us to preview, because it's a there's some ideas you can have, but it could change. Like, it could be completely different. Like, we could do a Valor preview in 5 or 6 different ways, and all of them could be wrong. And it's just a really, really just wait and see sort of moment for this team.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, it's before this is the make or break season for Phil Dos Santos. He has to learn how to make the playoffs, and he has to be able to get his players to perform to that level. Because you look across the league, you know, most of the teams have improved. You can look at all of the recruitment for all of the teams. You could say that at least most of them have gone to another level, have strengthened, either because they haven't lost a core, like the strength of the core, and they've added a couple of more pieces, like Cavalry, which we'll talk in a little bit, or they've just gone from strength to strength, adding exactly what they were missing last season, thinking like a Halifax or like a Vancouver FC.
Mm.
The league is improving. You don't want to be left behind. They already were last place last
Yeah.
season, and it's not going to get any easier this season because each of the other clubs have improved to some varying degree. Now is really the time for Phil Dos Santos to repay that faith that the club has given in him and showcase the ability that he has as a coach, because not many teams are going to give you a contract extension after finishing last in the league, and not many teams are going to allow you to have such a complete overhaul of players unless they believe in you. And it's this is like sort of the last chance for Phil Dos Santos to get
Mm.
to that level that we all think he is, of being that good coach that we are expecting of him because of how much commitment he puts to growing as a coach. And this is sort of his last opportunity for it. But I'm also curious. I mean, I know you sort of feel the same way, and I'll ask you about Phil specifically, but I'm also curious, do you think that this might be a make or break season, not only for Phil Dos Santos, but for the club itself? I know that might be a little
Mm.
melodramatic, but there have been a lot of, it was not like we haven't seen a club dissolve before
Yeah.
in the CPL. And for a club that consistently is finishing outside of the playoffs, a club that struggles at times with attendance, a club where a lot of the fans aren't happy with the club. We'll go back to what is the three CPL teams each team's fans hate the most. Valor's think number one was Valor.
Yeah.
There are serious issues at the core for Valor FC that go beyond what's on the pitch, but it starts from what happens on the pitch. Do you think if it's another season when they finish last or second last, it might spell trouble for not only Phil Dos Santos but the club itself?
I think mostly it's Phil Dos Santos to start with. This club, it's not just the performances on the pitch, it's what they're doing off the pitch as a club in the community. I don't think, from speaking with other sort of Valour fans, the club are quite sort of they're not like they're not like they're not part of the community. They're a club that's there that they're not doing enough to build things, and because they've got a lot on their plate, they've got to improve. They've got that as well. They've got things have to go in, and it's you look at other clubs who are performing well, like Cavalry, their work that they can do in building their sort of fan base because their team are playing well, their team are organised, they've got a philosophy in place. So they've built up from Cavalry Foothills into Cavalry FC, and there's something there already. So they can have that extra time to go and build up their sort of supporters group. And same over in Halifax. Valour need to start getting better on the pitch to then start improving how they do things around Winnipeg. And I think they're in a difficult situation, and this Phil Dos Santos has been given this chance to try and improve things, to then go one step closer to trying to improve the fortunes of this club, like as a whole.
Yeah, because you see how much love and passion a lot of the Valor FC fans give to this club, and you kind of feel like they need to repay that to be able to continue to grow that bond with Winnipeg and with the community. You need to repay their faith in the team with some good performances. It sort of starts and ends on the pitch with everything that might be going on in the background.
Yeah.
It sort of starts and ends with what happens on the pitch. So they definitely need to perform. Which leads me to sort of the last question before we move on to MVPs and starting 11s. What will it take this season for Valor to make the playoffs? That's $1 million question. I'm sure every
Yeah.
Valor fan is thinking about it. But for you, what do you think it'll take?
It'd be really, really like so simplistic and maybe a bit flippant with this, but we've spoken to managers before around this league who say, like, you play each other 4 times a season. Every season, the managers aren't changing that much. The style of play doesn't change huge amounts, and it's a bit of a chess match between these coaches at times. Last year, Halifax had struggled for a while, making little changes, hadn't really done well. Huge change. Let's make a huge change. And then, like, all of a sudden, we're coming in fresh, and teams are going to take a few games to get used to what we're doing. Maybe that's what Valour were thinking going into this and going, right, let's have a massive change. We'll go into the season completely fresh. It gives us that little bit of a chance of catching people off guard, making it difficult for them to prepare to play us. And we'll try and build some momentum from that to start with. I mean, looking at what this club needs to do to improve quickly, that's the sort of immediate thing that comes to mind. It is really simplistic, but I mean, that's kind of like a thought behind it for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to what I was thinking, which is like I think Phil Dos Santos needs to adapt to the times a bit more. It was a criticism I had initially for Tommy Golden Jr. at the beginning of last season is, can he adapt to the times? Because I feel like that's what was missing from his team. And he did, and that's why Cavalry did so well last season. I feel like Valor need the same thing, and it doesn't just mean getting a bunch of new players and almost an entirely new, squad. It means your actual principles, your tactical philosophy. Obviously, there are things that he's going to say that are non-negotiable because that's the way that he wants to play regardless, and that's fine. but you have to be able to tweak because, like you mentioned, you face these teams 4 times a season. If you play the same way or too similar the way that you were last season, and these clubs are improving, then they're just going to beat you harder, and it's going to be even tougher to get results. Not to mention that you're starting your season going to their homes, which is the toughest way to win is away from home. So you need that element of surprise, especially at the beginning of the season, to really, get those early points and rise out and exactly get that confidence, not just about the points, but get that confidence, get that togetherness, get that momentum for the team. Because if it takes you a few weeks or months to get that first win because you were away and because our teams already know how you're going to play, it's going to be a really tough season afterwards. So I'm hoping that not just because they have new players, they'll surprise the other teams in CPL. I'm hoping it's gonna be maybe not a complete overhaul of tactical philosophy, but there's gonna be some element of adaptation and little bits of tweaks and changes given new players and given that Santos hopefully recognizes that I need to, be able to get this team attacking more and score more goals because a lot of other teams are doing that consistently. They're just focusing more on, having that defensive solidity to build from and then playing some really attractive attacking football, in the way that Forge, Cavalry, and Halifax love to play. That's what I think is going to be the biggest thing for Los Santos, and I think it's going to hang in the balance really in the opening rounds when they're away from home, because that'll set the tone for the whole season. But now let's move on to some potential MVPs for Valour. Some of the players that you might think might be, even if they don't have a great season, there might be the diamonds in the rough, or might be the reason why Valour actually makes the playoffs for the first time. That would be huge. So which are the players? I chose these three specifically because of the importance that they have, not only that they've shown either to the club, like Kean Williams is one, but also coming in, the expectations that they have. I think Sean Hundal and Zachary Secunda, Secunda was pipped as one of the best fullbacks in the league when the league began. Then he went away. Now he's coming back, and he has learned to be a much more advanced player, playing on the right midfield or on the right wing even. So I think big expectations are coming in for both of those players because fans at least know their names more. And Keon Williams, I mean, we both talked about how important he can be to the team when he's played in the right position, which we both, basically, campaigned for him to be played at the 10 last season. So hopefully he gets to be playing the position where he thrives the most. But yeah, which one of you, of these three or any other players maybe, do you see potentially having that MVP season for Valour?
Sean Handel is going to score more goals than Alejandro Diaz does at Vancouver this season. And
wow, I didn't know it was time for hot takes.
Huge statement to Afshin got me of Vancouver FC of I was the player you should have built this team around. He was brilliant at the beginning of the year, and they phased him out and moved him on. Obviously, there was issues that arose within that camp. He's got a lot to prove. He did it in a bad team. Vancouver are a bad team at the start of the year. So I big season for him.
Yeah, fair. And I mean, he's coming back to Valour, a team that he's been to before, and I'm sure he's going to have that drive to prove Vancouver FC wrong, like you mentioned. I don't know if I'll go so far as to say that he'll score more goals than Diaz. I think that's
it's a
hot take. It's a hot take, but I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I mean, yeah, you look at the way that Diaz finished the season last season, and there might be some logic in there, but we'll save that for the Vancouver FC episode. Yeah, I'm gonna actually go with Kean Williams. I think that because so many of the other style players have left, and because he, it took a while for him to commit to Valour again. It was only recently that we really got the word that he is staying behind, not behind, staying with Valour FC. I don't know where that came from. But I think he is due to have a big season, and as long as they play him in the right positions, I think he could be integral to the way that Valour play, because he was sort of at times he was giving the team that missing spark in the way that he was playing. Just the team couldn't really finish; they couldn't benefit off of it too much. Hopefully now with some of the other players that are maybe, you have Sean Hundell, who is better in the build up, I would say, than us, than like Novak or Siege was at least last season,
Mm.
and you might be able to see Kean Williams flourish a little bit more in the team. But yeah, pretty solid choices for potential MVPs. Now let's move on to what their potential starting 11 may be to start the season. I'm still thinking that, yeah, they'll probably continue with this sort of 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1 kind of variation.
Mm.
We have the new goalkeeper after Ryan Yesley left in Jonathan Viscosi, the new center back partnership of Tasmo Kudus and Abdou Samake. Jordan Haynes, I think, is going to start at the left back position. I don't know. I think I put that there mostly because the other option that they have to play at left back, aside from Dante Campbell, who we put in the actual midfield because
Yeah.
he's a midfielder, even though he does pretty well at defense. I want to see him in the midfield. Temi Antonoglu, the player that they got from
Mm.
TFC2, we actually put on the left wing. So that's why I think Jordan Haynes that's why we sort of put Jordan Haynes there. Roberto Alarcon, I think, is dead set to be the right back.
Yeah.
We actually had a discussion about what the midfield, the double pivot is behind Kean Williams at the 10,
Mm.
because I advocated for Juan Pablo Sanchez. I might be a little biased in that, given that he has Colombian heritage like myself. While you said Marcelo Polisi should be the one pairing alongside Dante Campbell. What do you think? I mean, you pay attention to Valor more than I do. Why do you think that Polisi and Campbell is the way to go in that double pivot for Valor?
I think, yeah, I like to punish myself with Valour, it seems, and I think Felici was just too important as like the motivator, the guy that just to push the team on. To like, he's like he will throw his body in, put it on the line, but then actually have a little bit of quality about him as well. Which I agree. Juan Pablo Sanchez is a really good player, and I'm really excited for him. I think he's going to have a much bigger year this year than he did last year at Valor. He got some glimpses, and we saw what he could do. I think he'll start to get much more minutes this year. I just think Police is just too important. When you're losing Gutierrez out of that midfield, you've got to keep Felici in there. He'll probably end up captaining this team, I'd imagine, just to get them. Like, he'll take them out, he'll get people going, he'll rile up everyone around him to try and get more out of them. It's like with the only. I would like to see Juan Pablo Sanchez in there, which for me would probably end up going back to the old Valor of the three
The flat
midfielders.
midfield three.
Yeah, I just think you can't continue with Jordan Haynes as your starting left back.
Yeah.
It's that he was an issue there when Kean Williams was put out left. When Debrian was there, there's someone to overlap. Jordan Haynes he's not great going forward. He's not great going back. So Kean Williams got dragged outside. Maybe with someone like Antonoglu, who's got this attacking sort of ambition about him as well. Kean Williams can then drift in off the wing if they're going to play that, and he can then pick up in attack. You've got wing backs. We know from last year when Debrian and Becerro were playing, they get them forward and they get balls in the box. Their wingers can then come inside, but when they're not playing, they didn't get that chance, and the striker was isolated. So that's a possible tweak that I was thinking while we were doing this. But yeah, it's who knows? We feel this to maybe comes out with like a 3-back-3 and
3-4-3 or something like that. Yeah. No, that's fair. I mean, yeah, I agree. And Jordan Haynes is probably like you would want somebody else starting at the left back. I could potentially see Phil Dos Santos trying to mold Temi Antonoglu sort of as Debrian 2.0 at left back. And then I don't really know, like Jordan Swibble, the Australian that they brought in. In the press release, they said that he was a complete and versatile forward. So I don't know if that means that they're looking to put him on the wing, because I mean, I know Sean Hundell must have gone. The first promise he must have gone was like, "We will not put you on the wing.
yeah, exactly.
You will be in the middle." So if somebody has to go on the wing, it'll be Jordan Swivel, I'm thinking. So maybe Jordan Swivel will start on the wing, and then
Possibly.
you'll have Temi Antonoglu on the left, or maybe you can have Kian Williams be on the wing, have a midfield three with Juan Pablo Sanchez maybe in there, and then have Temi Antonoglu on the left, letting Kian Williams sort of drift inside. A lot of different options that you can have, and like you mentioned, you never know what might happen with
No,
Los Santos,
exactly. I mean,
especially with this new team coming in.
we're not mentioned like players we haven't got on there. Jordan Farrier, Noah Verhoeven, could end up being starters from this like off-season break and the build-up into pre-season. They might push themselves into being starters. There's
And
there's so many
Chantopoulos
questions.
too,
Yeah,
the German center back.
yeah. So yeah, lots of questions, but that's the hardest one.
Yeah, definitely. This was definitely the hardest club, I think, for us to predict. But now it's over, and now we'll move on to our next club, which is Cavalry FC, the reigning North Star Shield champions from last year. Some points I will go over is how they've kept a lot of their players. Their core is looking strong. They've had a few key pieces for depth, and will the CONCACAF Champions Cup help them defend their North Star Shield? And can they potentially do the double and get that elusive North Star Cup? Let's start with their incomings. I mean, they've brought in some pretty big names. Not that
No,
many names. They're not a team that sort of like Forge. They're not bringing in many players. And then I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you're keeping a
yeah.
lot of your strongest and best players, why would you bring in more
Mm.
players necessarily? But they have brought in some pretty big pieces in terms of having that depth position. The biggest one being Diego Gutierrez from Valour FC. He's somebody that I think if he isn't starting, he's one of the best holding midfielders that you can bring off the bench in the league. Like
Mm.
that's like
He's nice
huge
and
super sub.
flexible in that midfield.
Exactly.
Coming for any of those players.
Yeah, he can, and we've seen him. He can play advance. We didn't see him all that much because he wasn't able to.
Yeah,
But when he goes on a run, he can play quite advanced and in more attacking positions, and he's a wonderful holding and defensive midfielder as well.
yeah.
So he can literally come for any of the midfield, central midfield positions for Cavalry as a substitute. They've brought in Tobias Warchevsky too, which we talked a little bit about, a striker that had a pretty good record in scoring goals but hasn't played in a year. We saw a little bit of him in the
Mm.
CONCACAF Champions Cup. Didn't see him do all that much, but I think he's just getting his legs
Yeah.
back, getting that sharpness back. So he might prove to be a little bit of a surprise package for Cavalry since we don't have much on how he has played recently because he's had a year-long break. And then the other player I put there that was exciting is Lucas Diaz, or
Mm.
Lucas Diaz, from Sporting CPB. He's in on loan, and he's for those Canadian men's national team nerds that are always looking for the next young upcoming dual nat. They
Exactly.
will know of Lucas Dias as a player that is picked to be a very exciting prospect for
Mm.
either Portugal or Canada, and he is someone that now comes into this league with some hype around him because of that, and could play a pretty big part
Mm.
based on how much he could play. Looking at some of the players that they've brought in, a lot of these players, Leighton Brooks as well, and Jack Barrett, I think was the goalkeeper from Everton Reserves, comes in as the second number two behind Carducci. They haven't done too much, but would you say that they have recruited what they need to be able to get that little bit better so that they could potentially not only defend their North Star Shield but get the double with the cup?
I think so. I think one of the things that Tommy Wilden Jr. will be wary of going into this season was the fact that they did manage games well, but they had to because they weren't they weren't creating that much considering the quality they had. Their games were very low scoring quite often, and they would hold out leads. And this is a risky game. He's added this depth into the forward line and into the midfield, where I think it gives him that opportunity to really actually sort of attack games at times and know that when things aren't working, when the midfield, like as much as Charlie Trafford and Jesse Daly were fantastic, they're not known. They're not there to create goals. They're there for sort of those workmen in the middle. And when you bring in Gutierrez, we'll see what Lucas Diaz can provide as well. They can take some of that pressure off the likes of Sergio Camargo, trying to bring in Ali Musi and William Accio. And so when players are slightly underperforming, or when players are when the other team is making it difficult, they've got some really interesting players to bring on.
Yeah. And I've always said that if you want to be a team that wins championships, you need to be strong not only on the pitch but on the bench as well.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to have those difference makers on the bench that you can bring on when times are tough. And you look at some of the players that they have brought on, Warchevsky, if he can play like how he did with the Eddies, he might be a piece that, if Meyer Bevan is ever having an off day, you could throw him on and he could probably do hopefully a better job than at times Joe Mason was for them last season. You look at
sort of energy and sort of a bit more hustle and bustle about him than Joe Mason
exactly.
had.
I think he's a bit more dynamic. He works a little bit harder. You look at Lucas Diaz, and you have a player that can learn from a player like Sergio Camargo in that advanced position and as an advanced attacking midfielder. And he himself probably is, gunning to play more senior minutes. And so he's going to try his best to really showcase his ability in maybe the short stints that he has at the beginning of the season while he gets used to it. And then you never know, he might be a player that might be starting over Sergio Camargo, which will be a huge feat given that Camargo is a day one cavalry guy.
Yeah.
But that's the challenge that you want to put for yourself as a young player coming in, and you know that you only have a year here as a loan. So I think some of the players that they've brought in are going to be motivated to not only be a part of a championship winning team, but to sort of break into it and fight for that starting place into it. So having that level of competition, having some really good guys on the bench to, have the starting players sweat a little bit and know that their performances dip. There are players on the bench that are more than good enough to replace me, will help Cavalry get to that next level. And you look at also the fact that the players that they have lost, that sort of is almost a statement of intent as well, because you look at Alarcon, you look at Gareth Smith Doyle, like there on the picture, Udo Kachima, Ben Fisk, Joe Mason, Ethan Beckford. These are players that had their roles last season, maybe didn't perform to the highest level with them, but they all had a part to play. But Tommy Willen Jr. was, kind of shows that he's not satisfied with just having a part to play. He wants players that probably have more of an impact, are hungrier, and they show more than what some of these players demonstrated last season. And some of them are surprised. I know that you were quite shocked when Gareth Smith Doyle's option was declined, because you thought he had a pretty decent season last season, and the fact that they allowed Ben Fisk to go back to Vancouver and Alarcon to go to Valour FC, and there's still that whole drama with Jose Escalante. We have no idea really what's going on with him in Motagua. And it seems like Cavalry are kind of like, if you don't meet this standard, we're now at a level where we've won championships, we want to stay here. You're not good enough. We're letting you go. Do you see it as that as well, as like kind of them moving into a higher level in terms of what their standards are?
Yeah, I do. I think Alarcon and Fisk, they decided you're not going to be regulars. And we're tempted by some other players, which I assume Leighton Brooks can provide a bit more of a spark than they did. Not to say they didn't perform well, like Ben Fisk did a good role, but I think they just realised this was the last season and they needed to shake things up and try and improve. He could very well have a decent season in Vancouver, but I just think his cavalry and Alarcon as well, their cavalry careers had come to an end, and they needed to change the scenery too. But yeah, Gareth Smith Doyle, I was really shocked. Like I said, when we were doing our sort of young players of the season, I was really high on him, and I thought he'd be get the chance, if depending on the business they did, to put in a good few good performances and try and build on the minutes he was getting at the end of the year. But yeah, obviously me and Tommy Wilden Jr. weren't seeing the same player.
No, and I'm genuinely, because I also was pretty high on him as well, and I'm surprised that we haven't seen any news about him. I thought that he would get picked up by another CPL side rather quickly, and it hasn't happened there. I heard nothing about him so far, and him finding a new club or anything. So he's a decent player. Hopefully, he finds his feet, if not in the CPL, somewhere else where he can continue to grow and develop as a player. But moving on now to the fact that this team has a little bit of an advantage going into the season, you would think, because they played in the Champions Cup. Same with Forge. This was the first time that they played in the Champions Cup, and although they weren't able to win either of the games against Orlando, they did manage to get a goal through Meyer Bevan, and it was an experience that Tommy Wilden Jr. said that will help his team in the future. So the question is now, looking at the CPL season, how much do you think that Champions Cup journey, even though it's just 2 matches, will help Cavalry sort of prepare for the 2024 CPL season to defend their championship and hopefully get the cup?
Yeah, like you say, I obviously got beaten in both, but I was really quite impressed with how they did in both games. I thought they didn't make things difficult. They didn't make Orlando look bad like Inter Miami made them look bad. But I really felt that the way Cavalry were able to create opportunities, get into those final third, and maybe the last ball wasn't quite right, and they were able to keep possession in games. They really started to get a bit of confidence in areas of the game, both games. And I said to you, when we look back at them, I think Oscar Pereira would have probably been pretty disappointed despite the result, because I think they did really well. And I think we saw some players, listen to you, Willie Accio, it's times I just felt maybe they were a little bit, maybe there was some nerves. It's their first time Cavalry in there. But once he started actually trying to run at players, you saw a little bit more confidence. Ali Musi was on the other side, and he seemed to have a little bit, but he was more prepared to have a go at the fullback. They had these, like the players really did start to feel like, okay, actually we're building towards something. Yeah, we're playing against a team with astronomical finances in comparison with CPL, but Charlie Trafford was walking around there trying to really dictate the midfield against international players, and I was really impressed. And I think they will probably come away from these games. Yeah, we've lost. Yeah, we've conceded a few goals, but we've got one. And in periods of both of those games, we did look like a very competitive side against an MLS side, which I don't personally agree, but others in MLS are tipping to finish quite highly in the Eastern Conference. So that's got to they've got to take that back to Calgary and just think, yeah, we're building towards something, and we've got belief in ourselves to go and keep improving on last season, and let's get back into the CCC next year.
Yeah, and I think that will be very much the goal now for Tommy Wilden Jr., where he'll be able to say to his players, look, we had our first experience, we dipped our toes in the water of what it is to play at this level against Champions Cup opposition. Now let's make sure that we're there again next year, so now we can do more than just dip our toes in the water. Now we can actually fight. Now we know what is expected of us, and we can go that little bit further. It's something where once players have that taste for continental football, have that taste of what it is to play some pretty strong opposition. I mean, I know with Forge, we'll talk about them in the later episode, but with Forge, and you look at the fact that they faced Chivas, that's something that the players will want to have again, that challenge, and that will help them be hungrier for winning either the cup or the shield, because they want to have that opportunity again to
Yeah.
face top opposition, whether it be from Mexico or the US or some of the other teams in CONCACAF as well, that give you a different dynamic, and they give you a different challenge, and you get to go to new places that you normally wouldn't, because
Exactly.
you're playing in Canada. And I think all of those things are attractive, and it allows these players to dream about, I want to be in that again. And
Mm.
that'll drive players to perform to even greater heights, hopefully,
Yeah.
than what we saw last season. Because I mean, for Cavalry, the league is theirs to lose. They're the defending champions, and a lot of people are saying that they will probably be champions again, because the fact that they kept their core and they've added some really good depth pieces. But for me, what leads me to my next point is if they can get the cup. Because if you were Tommy Millen Jr. and you knew that you had already won the league and that's something you'd be chasing for a long time, would you want now be like, okay, league's done, we can win it again and I'll be happy, but now I want that cup? Because I feel
Mm.
like a lot of people are thinking that, personally, that they were like, okay, now it's time to get the double. Now it's time to win both trophies, to be the first team to do that and add that to our legacy.
Yeah, that's got to be sort of ambition number one for this team going into it. They've got the players there to do it. They've seen what's been going on at Forge after big players moving on. Cavalry haven't had to deal with that. So yeah, it'd be. I think they're definitely going to be coming off of CCC, going back into preseason. We're thinking, right, like that's got to be what we're going for this year.
Yeah, and I think what will be more is like more juicy for them is that they'll probably hope that they can face Forge again in the playoffs. They'll probably be salivating at the thought that they'll face Forge again in the playoffs, and this time be able to beat them in the playoffs. Something that they couldn't do twice last season in the playoffs. Now they'll be able to. I'm sure a lot of them are dreaming that they'll be able to have a final, maybe this time at Atco Field against Forge, and this time they come out the victors, make the journey all that sweeter. But at the end of the day, I think regardless of who is in front of them, they'll just want to win that cup. And honestly, if they do win that cup, it'll really put into contention this Cavalry side, because it's virtually the same of this season and last season. Is that one of the best sides in the CPL? If they won the Shield last season, then this season maybe win the Shield again and win the cup. I think that'll be a conversation that quite a few people might be interested in having, especially since that's something that I love to have. Anyways, these conversations of which side is the best side in this league's history or whatever. Always love those hypotheticals. But let's move on to potential MVPs for Cavalry. Uh, I went through some of the players, and I decided to go through some of the easier picks
Yeah.
because of the reigning MVP in Dan Klump, and one of the nominees in Ali Musi. But I also put there Willie Accio potentially having an MVP season, because of the fact that you have a player that is exciting, and when he has that confidence in him, he can take a player on. He can, create something out of nothing. He will have those magical moments. And to have that on the left side as well as the right side, teams are going to be scared because they don't know which side to mark more, the left or the right, because you have Ali Musi and Willie Accio both barreling down the wings and threatening you on either side. So I think Willie Accio might have a big season ahead for
Yeah.
Cavalry, especially now that he is the time to build off of his pretty good performances last season and be even more accustomed to the league and playing in this Cavalry side. But for you, do you have any other potential MVP picks outside of these three, or are these sort of the same locks for you?
I think, I completely agree. Those two wingers, especially Missy and Akio, I'm really excited for their seasons again this year. But let's not forget about Sergio Camargo. I
Hmm.
I just think like he could if he can add a few extra goals to this team. The fact that if Wachewski um, proves to be a better backup to Mylon Reed than they had last season, it could give Sergio Camargo plenty of space to actually sort of work his magic. And he had a really good season, like for long periods last year. And yeah, I think he could be a key part again in creating a lot. So yeah, if he can get some more like higher digits on those goals and assists than he did last year, like there's a player there that could really sort of surprise a few people. I'm not saying he will, but he's got the ability to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was that period in the sort of the second half of the season where he was starring for Cavalry. He was sort of that player that was pulling all the strings in the midfield, and he was coming up with a couple more goals and assists. And he's an integral and vital part of the team. But you're right in that when you're looking at awards, a lot of times people look at stats and
Yeah.
not just what you do, and he sort of lacks in the stats department. If he can add a couple of goals and a couple of assists and maybe start red hot from the beginning of the season, then yeah, he can definitely have a shout for potential MVP. Another player I was thinking about maybe as an outside shout for potential MVP is Eric Kobsa.
Mm.
I think that he's a player that, last season learned a lot by playing alongside the MVP and Dan Klump. And I think the fact that now it's pretty much his back line alongside Klump, like that's the duo, you'll be able to see him thrive more and be even more solid. And, when you talk about CPL center back duos, we had the Didic Mayer Guerre one where it's like that's a solid combo. I can see that really happening with Kabsa and with Dan Klump this season. And maybe Tommy Wilden Jr. throws a curveball and actually says, Kabsa, you're going to play in the midfield. You're going to play in defensive midfield. You never know because he has the ability to. He
Mm.
has it in his locker to be able to play in the midfield. Maybe that'll open a new dynamic for Kabsa and this team, and maybe he'll surprise people. But yeah, I think he's going to have a big season, and you never know. He might be in that conversation come the end of the season. But let's talk now about potential starting 11s, and I like the contrast between our potential starting 11 with Cavalry and the one with Valour, because Valour had so many new players that we didn't know who could fit into the starting 11 and which players are from the old Valour are even going to start. And then you look at Cavalry and you look at our starting 11 and that we have that the Cavalry might start with, and you're like, that's the same team from last season? Because let's go through it. Obviously, Marco Carducci starts in goalkeeper. You have Danny Klopp and Eric Kobsa as the center backs. Bradley Camden on the left. Fraser Ayer on the right. I know that you mentioned that Shabit Shom was actually starting on the right in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. I still see him more as a midfielder rather than a wing back personally. So I'm hoping we don't see him play at that right back position. I
He
think
does
Fraser Ayer.
comes into the centre midfield in possession and then counters, so it becomes like a 3 at the back when they've got the ball.
True.
So he
If
moves
they if
in, and so he's quite an interesting one.
Yeah, that might be true. If they have him be sort of as an inverted wing back to kind of form, gonna go 3-2-2-3. The very modern way of playing now that we see at the top level. Maybe Tubman Whelan Jr.'s taking notes now. Then I could see him play as starting as at that right back position. But if we're going with the traditional sense of a right back, I would. That's why I think we put Fraser out there. Surprisingly for me, this was a tough one. The double pivot of Charlie Trafford and Jesse Daly, that like they're such a good pairing together, and Tommy Willen Jr. knows that, and that was like the basis for his team in the double pivot last season for their championship winning season. Obviously, Diego Gutierrez could come in for either one of those players really, and probably perform just as well. I just don't see Tommy Wilden Jr. starting the season breaking that double pivot. But I do think Diego Gutierrez has a bigger part to play than just starting on the bench. But it's a long season. We'll see how things turn out. And then you have Sergio Camargo starting at the 10, Willie Akio on the left, Ali Musi on the right, and Meyer Bevan as the starting striker. Now, like I mentioned, that's essentially the same team from last season. Do you see any potential changes that Tommy Wheeldon Jr. might make to the starting 11? Maybe some fresh faces that he's brought in? Or do you see him sticking with what he knew and kind of going with if it ain't broken, don't fix it?
Yeah, I mean, we've had obviously the Orlando games where we get a sneak peek at what he's thinking, and this is kind of like the team he went out with. I agree. Diego Gutierrez has got the quality, and he's probably been brought in to say, right, well, these are our midfielders. You've got the quality now. Like, take the job from them. Like, it's not gonna be. Yeah, we're handing it to you. You've got to go and fight and get ahead, prove that you should be ahead of one of these, and we'll see how that plays out throughout the year. Whether looking forward, whether he's the clever thing with Cavalry and Tommy Wheeldon Jr. is they're prepping for next year already. Like you can tell by their moves and the players that leave how quickly they've got these replacements. They already know. So some of these players might not go in straight away. Maybe Thomas Wojciechowski is going to push Bevan further. As he builds up his sort of match sharpness and gels with the team. Like Bevan scored a lot of goals, a lot of penalties. Maybe having Wojciechowski there is going to push him on. But Wojciechowski's not going to want, like, none of these players are going to want to be subs. So that's like they've got this opportunity now to really push players. I think Musi and Akio especially are pretty secure. Camargo is quite secure, but rotations will happen, and you'd imagine Dan Klump's the first name on the
Oh
team.
yeah, 100%. He's probably the first name on any team sheet.
Yeah.
Is Dan Klump.
So yeah, it's going to be interesting with some of these players, but like, yeah, I think we'll see that same starting 11 again that we've mostly seen. Is the Fraser Edge, Amit Shom question mark over how he wants to address the opening game. It's just deciding what he wants from his right back and whether what he wants to do in possession, out of possession, and bizarrely, the fullback's the biggest factor in how that approaches.
Yeah, I know. How much the game has evolved. That's the thing that decides how you play the entire game, is whether your fullback is overlapping, underlapping, or inverted.
Yeah.
But yeah, with that is it for this week's show. Thank you so much for tuning in to our second episode of the season previews. We will be back next week with another two teams, and then we'll end off our season previews at the end of the month with the last two teams. Make sure you follow us once again on all of our socials at Coast to Coast FC. Maybe spare a follow as well for Canada Soccer Daily if you don't have that already. And let us know what you thought about this week's episode, about our previews for both teams. If you like the format, if you like the layout, I put a lot of work into these slides. So if you appreciate it, do let me know and then validate my hard effort.
If only listening, then they need to make sure they actually watch in the next one, because these you've put a lot of you got to check out what Felipe's been doing.
Yeah, I've been putting a lot of work on my graphic design, putting in the hours. So if you can, check them out on YouTube or on the clips that we have, or if you have the visual podcast thing on Spotify, that would be much appreciated. But until next time, I'm Felipe Vallejo.
And I'm Mike Rice.
And this has been Coast to Coast FC, signing out.